Hi everybody, David here for another episode of 164 Rescue, and before we get to that, I want to remind you, with Amy here and Ivy Jr., that the three of us would like to remind you the fundraiser is still ongoing. Check out the link down below to support the road trip for the Volvo Club of America National Meet this Labor Day weekend, as well as a nonprofit group for the community, Slow Rolling, which just opened registration for the Slow Rolling Festival 2021, which is happening at the end of September, the 23rd, 4th, and 5th. So check out that. Registration's open, and I'm already signed up with Ivy. I'll be seeing you there. Now on to the episode. We're going to talk all about carburetors, and I know I just adjusted the carb a little bit in the previous episode, but now we're going to get really in depth with the Stromberg and the differences between that and some of the SUs. Specific, what's the word? Precise. Carburetors. Those who understand them, I could see why they say that they're simple, and those who don't, I can understand why they shy away. They're very precise fuel metering devices. And in this video, I'm going to talk about these Zenith Stromberg 175 CD2 SE carburetors. There's two of them on this 1969 Volvo 164. And I'm going to attempt to adjust a non-adjustable carburetor to get optimum performance and maybe some decent fuel economy. I'm aiming for about 20 miles per gallon. Strombergs are very similar to their cousin, the SU carburetor, and both of these were very popular in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of European cars, mostly British, Jaguar, Triumph, Lotus, MG, etc., and Volvo. Now, they're both constant velocity variable choke carburetors, and I'll get more into that in a minute. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to have to compare my Zenith Stromberg 175s to the SU HS6 carburetors. They both are very similar in dimensions and performance. They differ a little bit in complexity and adjustability. The names and numbers can be confusing, so let's go over that real quick. British SU, or Skinner's Union, carburetors use the nomenclature as following. The first prefix is H, HS, HD, or HIF, determines the type. The following numbers are the size, 2, 4, 6, or 8. The sizes describe the carb's diameter after the throttle plate on the engine side, and is always coded as follows: 1 inch plus the number of the carb over a fraction of an eighth. For example, the HS4 carburetor is 1 inch plus 4 over eighths, which is 1.5 or 38.1 millimeter throat. The popular SU carbs used in Volvo were the HS4 and the HS6. 6 now being 1 3/4 of an inch throat. The letters. HS is horizontal, where the float chamber is next to the body. The HIF has an integrated float chamber. There's also type H and HD, but I'll let you read about those in the links in my video description box below. That's about it for the SUs. Fellow British company Zenith Stromberg has also been making carburetors for a long time. Their common sizes are 125 CD, 150 CD, 175 CD, and so on. The extra letters and numbers all added later to mean different things. The size and type of a Stromberg are given by those numbers. So 125 is a 1.25 inch throat, 150 and 175 are 1.5 inches and 1 3/4 respectively. The letters CD mean constant depression. CDS adds a cold start valve, and then there's CD2S and CD3, all used on older cars made before these anti-pollution laws demanded extra emission control fittings. Later types with those emission control fittings have the letter E, such as the CDSE and the CD2SE, which are my carbs. Tuning methods vary according to type, but Strombergs are not stamped with those type marks on all of them.
Fans that would blow the pollution away. Unfortunately, the concentrated smog that they would push out would kill every living thing in its path.
Federal law began requiring emissions on vehicles after 1968 for further refinements to control exhaust emissions to closer tolerances at idle and deceleration. Those are the two times under which emissions are the highest. So enter the 175 CD2SE. This added a temperature compensator, throttle bypass valve, idle trimming screw, and leak balancing screw. Okay, last one. Whoop, slipped. So, how does it work? Constant velocity variable choke, well, it just does exactly that. It uses a piston under constant depression to vary the size of the opening, or the choke, which maintains a constant velocity of the air entering the throttle in the carburetor. The piston uses an oil damper to help slow these changes, allowing enough time for the fuel to compensate for sudden changes in throttle and acceleration. From when you're cruising to when you go full open, it kind of slows them down and lets that vacuum increase for a moment to pull more fuel through into the car. So far, everything I've said here applies to both the SU and the Zenith Stromberg. Where the Stromberg differs is the use of a rubber diaphragm inside of the piston chamber, which they call the air valve. In the Stromberg, the fuel is delivered through this main jet down there, which is basically a brass tube that is a straight shot all the way through, and a jet needle, which is tapered to change the volume of flow going between the two of these and the variable annulus that's created in the gap between the needle and the jet seat. The profile or taper of a mixture needle is determined by its diameter at a number of different points. By manufacturer's convention, a needle is measured every 0.125 or eighth of an inch down from the top shoulder, resulting in 13 measurements. The Zenith Stromberg 175 CD2 SE dual carbs used in the 1969-1971 Volvo 164 3-liter engines used only 3 different needle configurations. From 1969 model year, it was a spring-loaded, which is this fella right here, B1R needle. 1970, it gets the B1AM, and 1971 gets the B1BE. After that, they all went to fuel injection. So knowing that the Zenith Stromberg carburetor is the same throat size on the 175 as the SU HS6, naturally comparisons will come up on the web. A lot of folks on the forums will be spending time convincing one another to ditch the old Stromberg and put in a set of HS6s, and you'll be so much happier for it. Now, the SUs are technically more adjustable, more tunable, fewer moving pieces, there's no rubber membrane in there for it to fail, and they also can get you pretty good fuel economy if you adjust them just right. The trouble is, a lot of those enthused folks need to remember that when you're replacing a worn-out old carburetor, yes, anything that's new will run better. It may just not be right. When I had a Volvo Amazon a few years ago and I had a dual HS4s in there, I sold the old worn-out carbs and I bought a Weber, and I was so proud of myself thinking that I saved some money. The Weber never ran right, my fuel economy wasn't good, the power was okay, and it was a constant battle to keep the thing going with parts and tuning. So, with carburetors, just like with seltzer water, when it comes to replacements, there's nothing quite like having the original. Nailed it.
The night life ain't no good life, but it's my life.
The ZF diaphragm gives more accurate air depression and raising of the piston, therefore it is more delicate. Allegedly, this exceeds the HS6 SU in performance when both are compared side by side. Now I say allegedly because with old car performance and satisfaction, it is all just so subjective and anecdotal. Everything is worn, no two builds are truly alike, etc., etc. The real issue that I'm up against this week is adjustability. To help set and adjust the fuel mixture, the early Zenith Strombergs had adjustable jets, then they went to adjustable needles. Unfortunately, with Emission's carbs, both became fixed in place, non-adjustable, without special tools. Some state that this is to keep a constant tune for 50,000 miles to meet those new emission standards. Others say that it'll wear out after just 30,000 miles, and then it starts to run poorly. I'll tell you now, she runs poorly. I mean, she sounds great, but the mixture is too heavy or rich. Rich and lean, for the folks at home, is the air-to-fuel ratio. We want an ideal 14.7 to 1 stoichiometric for the best power and engine longevity. Too much fuel is a rich condition. Poor performance, sooty black combustion, fouled spark plugs. Too little fuel, a lean condition. Damage to the cylinders, pistons, valves from pinging, pre-detonation, increased cylinder temperatures, bad fuel economy, bad power. Look, it's science, folks. Just go along with it. Since it's impossible to get a perfect mixture without a computer electronically controlling the metering and supply of fuel to air, we aim for an AFR between 12 and 13 on carburetors at idle and cruising, and somewhere between 11.5 to 13.5 at load. My Strombergs are worn. How much? I don't know yet. The first usual culprit is the diaphragm. The next is the throttle shafts themselves. They can allow air in if the bearings, which are just brass, have worn out. And then the other thing to check is the relationship between the needle and the jet. That constant rubbing from all the years of friction could wear it out. It could just be worn out already. So I'm going to reassemble this now that I've lowered the needle down. My throttle shafts felt pretty good. I replaced the spindle seal on the one that needed it, as well as the manifold seals, and since it has its own set of butterflies there. And everything seems to be okay. And the carburetor, I cleaned it up, and unless I get some really specific measuring tools to check the jets, that's probably my biggest culprit. So my only option now is to try to adjust something that is technically non-adjustable without those special tools. I'm going to lower the needles a little bit, about 20 thousandths of an inch down, and that should basically be like having the top adjuster here. My issue is that the car itself is running pretty rich. Normally you would just take an adjuster tool like this, put it up through the top of the diaphragm, and, well, with the cover on, and then you could lower the needle to its relative position of the jet. And, you know, I can't do that, and I also can't have her running this rich at such an early age. So I think the best thing to do is try to manually lower those needles. And that's exactly what I'm going to try. 20 thousandths of an inch on the little screw that holds them. I'll pull them out a little bit and then set them back in. See how she runs like that. And then if it needs more, we've got a little bit of wiggle room, I think, on those needles. Oh, there we go. We're back to nines. 20 thousandths of an inch lower made a 2-point difference in my idle air-fuel ratio mix. So now let's see how that affects our performance at cruising and at throttle, acceleration, wide open throttle, all that stuff. It's better by about 1 point when driving. So I'm going to lower the needles a little bit further and we'll go for a second drive. It takes a little bit of effort this way to actually adjust the mixture, but it is at least an option that I can do without special tools, just by moving that screw for the needle and letting the needle go up or down a little bit. I increased it another 20 thousandths of an inch, so we are just about 40 thousandths up from where it used to be flush. Also, forgive the poor audio quality. I dropped my microphone and she's broken now. You know, I'm really starting to suspect the oxygen sensor because she's running pretty good right now. I've moved the needles down closer to the jet, leaning the mixture out, about the same as you would get from 2 turns of the adjuster screw, but you know, these don't have an adjuster screw. And this guy's still kind of reading the same measurements, and then it's wildly all over the place. So I don't even know if I can trust the few moments where it looks like it's reasonably within the range of realistic readings. So our second adjustment is a little bit better, but still some fouling on the plugs. What I'm going to do now, and have already done, is I've set them at maximum spec. So the first adjustment, we would, 0.20, 0.020, then I did 0.040. I just set it all the way to the end, which is exactly at 0.808. So that is the same equivalent as about 2.5 turns on the adjustment screw. And that's because I need as much as I can get out of these. We're going to try these one more time, and I think the crush washer has had enough, so it won't give me many more attempts at removing this plug. But I think it's going to be good time to get that all sorted out. And if need be, I can always buy one new plug. These I'm using NGK BP7HS. I think S is the resistor. These are good plugs so far, and wow, that's a lot of anti-seize. I got to clean that up a little bit. My ignition timing is set at 16 degrees before top dead center. If this doesn't help, I'm just going to have to set it over to 20
give it a little bit more time to burn some of those fuels, and we'll just see how she runs. Well, I put it at max, which is even past the 80 thousandths, which is the limit from the adjuster screws approximately. That's the range that you get. So it won't even idle now. It will only run with the choke on and or acceleration. So I'm gonna set it down a little bit to 80 thousandths, which is still 80 thousandths more than where we started, but not that far. This is the extreme limit, so you can kind of get an idea of how adjustable the needles are. All right, carbies are back together for the 5th or 6th time now. I don't even keep track anymore. This is the sound that you want to hear when you finish everything. That nice dull thud of the piston dropping back to the bottom. And that's just me lifting it with my finger and dropping it. I'm under the impression that they need some resistance to keep the dampers elevated, so to recreate the conditions of it driving the way it should, I have the filter that stays on because that suction helps to draw or create some vacuum pull, which then lifts up these diaphragms. We are at 2 turns out on the mixture screw for each side and 1 turn in on the throttle screws. If it idles, that's good. We can go half a turn either direction on the mixture screws and as many as we need on the throttle. At the end of the throttle adjustment, I will have to set these guys again. So what I'll do now actually is pop them off. When I'm adjusting the throttle, I'll leave these disconnected because the screws will affect the relationship here, and then I'll want to adjust those so that we have ourselves a good idle. And if it won't idle, then I may have to come here and attach them so that I can wiggle it, or just use the choke cable until I can come here and raise the idle speed of those screws. Also, oh yeah, I just cleaned, this is important too. If you look back there, it's the, our choke, which I think is also called, it's not the bypass valve specifically, but I think it's just called the choke valve or something. There's no gasket on it. It's this screw here and this one here. And it's just machined to very tight tolerances, but it was dripping, so I cleaned it, made sure there was no debris or varnish gumming up the thing, but if it starts to leak again, I don't know what to do. I'm trying Bosch sensor right now. We'll just see if she decides to work or not. Wow, it is getting warm. Idle's really good right now. 13.5, 13.6. That's me tuning it by ear, everybody. Cool, let's go for a drive. .3, 12.2, 11.7, and all the way down to 10 at high RPM. Mid-range, 12, 11, it's counting down, 11.4, 11.3. Good. 13. Now let's coast. We're coasting 45 miles an hour. 13.8, 13.5, 13. Low 13s, mid 12s as we go uphill a little bit. 12.7, 12.6. Alrighty, folks. I think we're ready to call it here. Here's the valve in its function. This is the side here that A and the line are the 2 things that hit the cam. And then there's an H stamp there. Cool. The spring in here pushes against this plate, and that plate is where the gasoline will go through the chamber based on the input and then the output. And you can see it goes from very small hole, progressively larger. As you pull the choke lever further, it opens up those passages. This says out because it needs to go this way, not that way. Thankfully, that's all marked up. And I'm going to be sanding. There's no O-ring in here. There's no gasket out here. Some of them did have a gasket, but there's versions and versions of Strombergs out there, as we've learned. So I will just be using a 1000 grit sandpaper to clean up those surfaces. And to clean up the surface here on the carburetor, I'm going to be very careful to clean it properly afterwards so I don't have grit in my carb system. Again, very precise fuel metering devices. Don't get them dirty if you don't have to. As I've started sanding, you can see the highs and lows, the dirt from the years of just rubbing constantly back and forth. This is a spot I should have greased earlier, but probably didn't catch it in time because I just inherited these older, worn out carbs. But I'm gonna see what I can do to spruce this up. Oh, this was a mistake. Sorry, fellas.
Well, I hope you found that video helpful. I want to remind you one more time, check out all the links below. If this video was useful to you, there's also Patreon where you can support the channel and the project. In the next episode, I will be putting on the shock mounts on Ivy, getting those welded. And it's funny because we kind of welded them on backwards, but the car was fine. And then she has her first showing at like a small Cars and Coffee, which was really fun for me. And then I sent it over to a differential shop where she's currently awaiting a new rear end. So once that's all set up, I'm gonna basically hit the road for California, which is the small test before the big test for that road trip. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.